Good morning, internets. It is Monday morning. Batman and I are on the way to My Vegas magazine, and I'm determined to make it a good day. And I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about, you guessed it, Tesla. And I know what you're thinking. We're going to talk about crazy Elon and his crazy tweets about taking his crazy company all crazy private in a big giant buyout. No, you guys have heard plenty enough about that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what Tesla has done to my hometown. Because the consequences have been big and serious, and they mean big changes for established locals up there, like members of my own family. So Tesla and Panasonic get together and build this massive factory where Model 3s are made in between Sparks, where I grew up, and Fernley, which is basically the middle of nowhere. But it's not that far. It's like a 20-minute drive from the edge of Sparks, which is, I grew up in East Sparks. So it's not a horrible drive. It's just like when you get to the edge of town where I'm from, that's it. That's the edge of town. So when we say the middle of nowhere, it's the middle of nowhere out in the desert. And that's where, Tesla decided to put a factory. And if you were a Nevadan, you were pretty excited about that when Tesla announced that they were going to be building the factory up there, and that all those jobs were going to be coming into Washoe County. And now, at the time that the announcement happened, I was not living in Northern Nevada. I was living here in Las Vegas, and I was excited because I have family up there who, might be able to benefit from work at Tesla that wasn't available before. There's only so many different kinds of jobs available in Northern Nevada, in the place where I grew up, and it's expanding all the time. The Reno Sparks area has this very weird, diverse mix. It's got one foot in the future and one foot in the past, for sure. And that's, sort of the charm of the place. But the charm is being rapidly eroded by rising housing costs and rapid gentrification. Every time I go home to visit, the city looks completely different. And I go home several times a year, and every time I go, something new has been knocked down, or something old has been knocked down, and something new has, risen up in its place. And there are those of you who might make the argument, well, yeah, of course, Catherine, that's called progress, and that's what happens. Old thing gets torn down, and new things get built up in their place. And to a degree, I do understand that, but there are some things going on in Washoe County because of Tesla, because of the rising property values, that are really hurting locals. It used to be that you could afford, a modest 2 or 3 bedroom home with a dual income, and now it's basically unattainable. Those same little tiny 2-bedroom houses with a single car garage that were built in the 40s and 50s in Reno, that if you've ever been up there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The Great Depression style houses that I'm describing, that are part of Reno's identity and Reno's charm. Those same houses are now going for upwards of $360,000. Whereas before, they were overpriced at $230,000, and they've risen over $100,000 in value. To even think about being able to afford to, we're going to think about maybe trying to buy a house. A family has to have an income of $80,000 a year. Now, that's not completely unheard of or completely impossible for a dual income family, but being dual income it's difficult, and especially if you're raising kids, because the cost of childcare end up being pretty close to, the amount of money you're bringing in on that extra income. So a lot of families, like my own, when I was growing up, chose to have a stay-at-home mom because it ended up actually being more affordable and better for us kids. Now, different families solve these problems different ways, and I have no bias on my part for whether or not families choose to have, a stay-at-home parent, or, both parents work, or whatever. You solve these problems however you want to solve these problems. I'm just speaking from my own experience. I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad's an electrician, and there was a bunch of expansion and growth in the 90s that, the locals lamented at that time too, for the exact same reasons. Property values were going up, rentals became scarce and expensive, and, all of that construction meant my dad had a job and my family could survive. Construction has returned because there's an influx population, but they can't build the houses or the condos or the apartments fast enough for the rate at which the population is expanding. It's just not enough. The vacancies are at near zero. There's almost 0% vacancies. So because of that, competition for what remains is so high that the property owners can decide that the rent costs whatever they want. And the little 2-bedroom apartment that young people used to be able to share, I had a 2-bedroom apartment on Rock Boulevard, on Rock and Merchant, and that was my very first apartment. And myself and a roommate, and it was little 2 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, little living room in the middle, and the world's tiniest kitchen. And the 2 of us were pretty happy to pay around $750 for it. And that was a long time ago. But the same apartment now is going for, well over $1,000 a month. We're talking like $1,200 and $1,400 a month for that little apartment that I described. And not in a good neighborhood, by the way. Like not in a great neighborhood over there, like Rock and Audie in that area. And if you've never been there, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if I got a local who knows what I'm talking about, like, dude, Rock and Audie right there, side street, Merchant, behind the old Godfather's Pizza. Those apartment buildings over there, yeah, that was my hood. And it was in the hood. And, those are now becoming unattainable and unaffordable for young people just starting out and for struggling families. And a lot of this has to do with Tesla. A lot of this has to do with this massive factory up there and all of this California money that is coming into town. A lot of locals did get jobs, but it also brought a lot of people in, and this rapid growth, it's insane. It's now more expensive to live in Sparks, in the dingy little ex-mining railroad town that I grew up in, which is how Sparks got its name, by the way, because the trains coming in from Carson City to supply Reno and vice versa, they would start braking outside of town because that's how long it took them to slow down. It takes miles and miles to slow down a freight train loaded with, ore or whatever it was the trains were moving around. And they would throw sparks for miles outside of Reno, which is how you get the name Sparks. Like, that's what Sparks is. It used to be basically, it was little more than a truck stop with a public school district is basically what it was that I grew up in. And it's now more expensive to live in Sparks than it is to live in Lake Tahoe. Now, that's outrageous. Like, when I was a kid, I lived 40 minutes away from Lake Tahoe and just still really didn't have access to it because you had to have money to even be around up there because everything was so expensive. You couldn't afford a sandwich at any of those restaurants. And it's now, it's comparably priced to live in Lake Tahoe, one of the most luxurious and beautiful places in the entire world, as it is to live in Sparks. Sagebrushy, dusty, not even on the Truckee River, goofy little Sparks is now as expensive to live in as Lake Tahoe. Now, how is any family supposed to be able to get a foothold there? How is any kid supposed to be able to move out of his parents' house and build a life? Like, what's really the goal? What's the hope there? And it's removed a lot of hope. Every time I go up north, something new is knocked down and a new condo is in its place. They've torn down half of Victorian Square, the historic Victorian Square, birthplace of Hot August Nights, and central gathering place for every major event in Sparks for literally my entire life. They've ripped up half of it just to make room for condos. They tore out the old movie theater. They tore out everything to build more condos because the housing crisis is that bad. Now, that does make more jobs. I have this really weird situation where I believe that electric cars are the future. I love Tesla. I love the things that Tesla builds. I love the things that Tesla does. More than I like Tesla, I like the effect that Tesla has on other companies. I like the fact that Tesla builds an electric car and says, like, okay, we're going to come out, we're going to build electric cars, and they're going to be hyper luxurious and cost a lot of money. And then they do. And then a couple other companies do too. And then they say, well, we're going to build something at a, more moderate price point with the Model 3 that's smaller, that more people can afford, more practical with great range. And other companies do too. Other companies like Chevy and, all over the spectrum of auto manufacturers are starting to rise to meet that challenge. They see the demand and they want to compete. And Tesla inspires those companies to compete with electric and alternative fuel vehicles in a way that nobody else has been able to inspire so far. So I will always be eternally grateful to Tesla for that. We needed that change in our culture. It had to happen, and it had to happen 10 years ago, but it especially has to happen now. So I'm grateful to Tesla for those things. My own brother-in-law works at Tesla up north. But what it's doing to the housing prices there, what it's doing to the city, the way it's changing the landscape, and the things that I'm hearing from the locals who remain there. I've got 2 sisters, both married, both with children. And one sister has stayed in Reno, my younger sister, and my older sister has left Reno because the housing prices were so ridiculous. They couldn't get a foothold, and they couldn't build. They couldn't really build a life there. And I know what you're thinking, like, oh, they must have moved somewhere, more affordable. And maybe they went east in Nevada, or maybe they went to the Midwest, or maybe they went to the South where my brother-in-law's family is from. Or no, they moved to Los Angeles because it was more reasonable and affordable and efficient for them to live in Los Angeles than it was for them to live in Reno or Sparks. That's madness. That's absolute madness. That's craziness. So that's my rant for the day, guys. This is a very, very mixed bag, and I know that the effects of Tesla are much more far-reaching than the effects that it's having on my own hometown. And I'm not saying that all of the effects that it's had on Reno and Sparks are negative, but for locals, for people who are from there, for people who have been there for a very long time, the change is hard to bear. The price of every commodity, of everything that people need, of not just housing, but of everything, has gone up because there's just plain more people. And when you bring in more people, all of those people need services. Well, all of those people have to come in to provide those services. And it's just like this exponential growth thing that it gets out of control. And that's how you end up with cities like Los Angeles or Las Vegas. I live in a rapidly expanding city myself. The city's added probably 30 square miles to its area since I've lived here over the last 10 years. The edge of town is no longer the same edge of town that it used to be. And, that's progress, guys. But when people like, my sister can't afford to live in a place where they've always lived, where we all grew up together, and they can't afford to stay there even if they want to, it's kind of sad, and it sucks. It's interesting because this growth and expansion relies on people who work with their hands. It relies on blue collar work. It relies on people building the buildings that are needed, the people who build the houses, people like my dad who wire the electricity for the new construction, people like my brother-in-law who work at the factory. It relies on this blue collar blood, sweat, and tears. It's what it takes for progress. The progress really costs. It's not just visionaries in science and lab coats and people in meeting rooms wearing ties. It's at the end of the day, like, those are the people that make the decisions, but the people who actually make the thing happen, that execute the vision, are the workers. And all of this work and all of this vision that they have for the expansion of this area and everything that they're building has resulted in an environment that rejects the people that progress depends upon. And I don't know if I phrased that properly. It seemed a little inarticulate, but essentially this progress counts on that class of people, of those blue collar workers, and then it tells them you're good enough to build it, but you're not good enough to live in it because you can't afford it. And on top of that, you work at a place that doesn't pay you enough. Like, the place that you work and the things that you're doing are responsible for the rising cost of everything, but the salary is not rising to meet that cost. What people are actually making and what their take home is very, very often not in line with what the rising costs in housing and resources and shelter and electricity. And the more people there are, the scarcer those resources get, the competition grows, that's supply and demand, and things just get more expensive. They just plain do. And it's very sad to me. It's something that I've seen the effect of personally in my own life with my dad working in the trades. I've seen what the scarcity of resources and housing and work does. I've been through several of the shut down construction site, bad contractor, dad's not working right now, and now we have to find a way to weather that emergency. I've been through that before, and I can't imagine what it would be to go through that. And those are normal rises and falls. If you've never worked in the trades or been part of a tradesman's family, those are things that happen. And if your dad wasn't union, sorry, I can't imagine having to weather those things in this current economy, in this current environment, with Tesla being this big, massive powerhouse that it is there. I have a lot of appreciation, a lot of respect for Tesla and what it's done and what it's meant, and I don't want them to stop. But I wish someone would shine a little bit more of a light on what it's doing to the place where I grew up, on what Tesla is doing to the place and the people it depends on to keep making those profits. And so this is just kind of my way of talking about it a little bit. It's complicated. It's much, much larger than me, and I feel very out of my depth. I feel like I don't really understand a lot of the contributing factors to this conundrum, to Tesla, to Reno and Sparks and the housing market. These are all things that people with a lot more education than me, get paid a lot of money to analyze. This is just, from the cheap seats, this is what it looks like to me, guys, and this is my own experience, and that's me just putting my spin on it. But it's complex, and it is difficult, and it is a legitimate hardship for so many Nevadans. And, this is EVs of Nevada, and that's what I like to talk about here is electric vehicles and Nevada. And this is what some electric vehicles, this is what the manufacturer of electric vehicles, of Teslas, particularly the Model 3 up there, although they make the S too, that's what it's doing to my hometown and to people that I know personally, and people that are family to me, and people that I love. And every time the lease is up on my sister's condo, she panics because they can't afford to leave or go to somewhere else because everything else has gotten so much more expensive. And the landlord is in a position to raise the rent as much as he wants because that's how much the value have gone up. And if she's like, oh, I can't afford that, he's like, fine, can replace you in less than 24 hours of somebody who's willing and has the money. And it's true. And that's a really terrifying position to be in when you were trying to raise a young family. I personally have not made people, so I don't know that anxiety. I only know, what she's described to me in very small part, and it sounds terrifying. And, my own parents went through it to an extent, but it was never anything like this. Video got a little interrupted there. That was kind of weird. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up now, guys. It's unfortunate that these things are effects, that these things are consequences of Tesla, but I want to know what you think. Has anybody ever lived in a town that this has happened to, where a big corporation has come in and completely changed the landscape of everything you know, love, and recognize? Has anybody seen their own housing market completely blown apart and exploded by industry coming in and changing things, changing everything, changing the way things are done? And if so, I really want to know your own experiences. And if somebody has more experience than we do with just the last couple of years with Tesla, does anybody have an estimation on the long view here? What's going to happen in the long run? Is this a Silicon Valley thing where it's just going to keep on going and going and going and going, and it's a runaway train of nowhere, and the locals are just going to get pushed out? Or what happens? I don't know what happens, but if anybody know what happens next, if there's a natural dialectic that's going to play itself out that I'm just not familiar with, I'd really like to be made familiar with it. So please share with me your own experiences. And I think that's going to about do it for me today, guys. I really want to know what you think. This is a discussion. Let me know in the comments down below. Tesla, friend or foe? I really like it. I got a mixed bag of reactions on my own over here, and I want to know what your thoughts are. And that's I think we're gonna leave it right there. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, please consider subscribing right over here. Here's some other things I think you'll enjoy right down here. My name is Catherine. This is EVs of Nevada. Please remember to like, subscribe, and smile, even when Tesla screws up your housing market.